Ethan Cole had worked late nights before, but this one felt different. The whole research base had been quiet for hours until a soft alarm echoed through the hallway. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a steady tone from the security system that meant something unknown had entered the perimeter. He rubbed his tired eyes, grabbed his ID badge, and hurried toward the lab. The air outside was cold, the kind that stung his skin and made his breath visible in thin white clouds. He didn't expect to find anything unusual. Usually those alarms were false signals, wild animals wandering too close or a sensor tripped by dust storms. But as he neared the main testing hall, he noticed two guards standing stiffly outside the door. One of them looked uneasy, his hand resting on his holster. Ethan slowed his steps. "What's going on?" he asked. The older guard shook his head. "You should see for yourself, Mr. Cole. Something or someone crashed out there tonight." "They brought it in," Ethan frowned. "It?" The guard only pointed toward the reinforced glass door. "You'll see." Ethan swiped his card and stepped inside. The room was bright, too bright. Every light in the ceiling seemed to be turned on at full power, bathing the floor in sterile white. And then he froze. In the center of the room, under a ring of medical lamps, stood a woman. She wasn't restrained, just standing there barefoot on the metal floor, wrapped in what looked like torn silver fabric that shimmered faintly. Her hair was pale as snow, falling to her shoulders, and her eyes were a shade of silver gray that didn't seem quite human. For a second, Ethan thought maybe she was part of some experiment, an actress maybe, brought in for psychological testing. But no, her face wasn't pretending. There was a calm fear in her expression, the kind that comes from confusion and exhaustion, not performance. He glanced at the technicians nearby. "Who is she?" he whispered. A young scientist beside him shook his head. "She came from the crash site. Capsule landed 20 miles out in the desert. No ID, no injuries except a few bruises. Doesn't speak English or anything we can recognize." Ethan took a step closer, drawn by something he couldn't explain. She turned her head slowly toward him. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to slow. There was no hostility in her gaze, only sadness, like someone who had lost everything. "Do we have translation equipment running?" Ethan asked. "We tried," another scientist replied. "She doesn't respond to any of the languages in the database. Keeps repeating a sound that could be her name or a request." "We can't tell." Ethan studied her carefully. Her posture was graceful, almost royal. Despite her strange clothes and the faint marks on her arms, she held herself with dignity. She looked scared but proud, as if she refused to appear weak. When he moved closer, she didn't back away. She simply looked at him, eyes steady, as if measuring his heart. He gently spoke. "I'm Ethan." He placed a hand on his chest. "Ethan?" She watched, silent for a moment, then slowly raised her own hand and placed it over her chest. "Ariel," she said softly. The sound was clear but carried a musical tone like wind moving through glass. Ethan blinked. "Ariel?" She nodded once, then looked around the room nervously, as if the bright lights and buzzing machines made her uneasy. Her expression said everything. She didn't belong here. Ethan turned to the others. "Turn down the lights. You're scaring her." The technician hesitated. "Sir, we're under protocol." "Just do it," Ethan said firmly. As the lights dimmed, the woman, Ariel, breathed a little easier. She glanced around, then back at him, and for the first time a faint, grateful smile crossed her face. It lasted only a second, but it changed the whole atmosphere in the room. Ethan motioned toward the medical cot. "Please," he said gently, hoping she'd understand. She tilted her head, then stepped forward. Her movements were slow and deliberate, every motion precise. It was like watching someone from a dream trying to exist in reality. When she sat, Ethan noticed strange patterns faintly glowing on her arm, thin blue lines that faded whenever the room got too bright. He wanted to ask, but words failed him. He crouched near her, holding out a water bottle. "Drink," he said softly, demonstrating with his hand. She hesitated, then took it carefully, studying the bottle like it was a piece of unknown technology. After a moment, she mimicked his gesture and took a sip. Her eyes widened slightly, surprised by the taste of something so simple. Then she looked at him again, her silver eyes filled with meaning. She pointed upward, tracing a small star shape in the air with her finger. "Home," she whispered. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He understood that one word completely, not through translation but through feeling. She wasn't from here. She was trying to find her way back. The others watched from behind the glass, whispering to one another, but Ethan didn't hear them. For that brief moment, it was only him and her, two beings from different worlds, connected by quiet understanding. She started drawing shapes on the table with her finger, circles and lines that looked like constellations. Ethan recognized none of them. She spoke softly, her voice like a melody, repeating names of stars he had never heard before. Every now and then, her voice trembled like she was holding back tears. Ethan reached for his small notepad and began sketching what she drew, carefully copying every symbol. She watched him and nodded, approving. When he handed her the pen, she looked at it with curiosity, then began to draw again, her movements quick but graceful. The symbols formed a pattern unlike anything in human astronomy. Hours passed like minutes. The guards eventually left. The other scientists went to file reports, but Ethan stayed. He couldn't bring himself to leave. He knew this was history in front of him, but more than that, it felt personal. Every time she looked at him, her eyes spoke 1,000 words without sound: fear, gratitude, confusion, and something deeper he couldn't name. Her expression said everything he needed to know. She trusted him, even when she didn't trust anyone else in the room. When dawn broke outside, the soft pink light of morning crept through the high windows of the lab. Ariel sat quietly, staring at the rising sun as if it reminded her of something far away. Ethan stood beside her, exhausted yet unable to look away. He finally whispered, "We'll figure this out. I promise." She turned to him, her silver eyes catching the early light. Then slowly she raised her hand again and placed it over her chest. "Ethan," she said quietly, her voice steady this time. He smiled, realizing that she had remembered his name. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by humming machines and soft daylight, Ethan understood something he couldn't explain in words. He was no longer just a scientist studying a visitor. He was a man standing at the edge of the unknown, and the woman before him was more than an alien. She was someone whose story had just begun to intertwine with his own. After the sun had fully risen, Ethan stayed by Ariel's side, watching her carefully. She moved slowly, examining the lab and its tools with quiet fascination. Her eyes flicked to the computers, the instruments, and the storage shelves. Every movement she made was precise, as if she understood some of their functions already, even though she had never seen them before. Ethan noticed that she seemed drawn to the maps of the stars on the screens. She leaned closer, tilting her head, and pointed at a cluster of tiny dots. Then she whispered a soft sound that rolled like music in the air. Ethan could not understand the words, but he could feel the meaning. She was searching for her home among those stars. Her eyes filled with longing, and for a moment Ethan saw a deep sadness. He wanted to speak to her, to comfort her, but words were not enough. He reached out gently and she flinched slightly, then relaxed when she saw his calm expression. He realized she had been through something terrifying and he had to be careful. "You are safe here," he said softly. "No one will hurt you." Ariel's gaze shifted to him, her silver eyes shining as if she understood him perfectly. She nodded once slowly. Then she made another sound, repeating it 3 times. Ethan guessed that it was her name, her way of connecting with him. He repeated it softly, trying to match her tone. She smiled faintly, the corners of her lips lifting just a little. It was a fragile smile, but it carried hope. The hours passed as Ethan tried different ways to communicate. He drew simple shapes on a notepad, pointing to them and saying the words aloud. "Sun," he said, pointing to a small circle. "Earth," he said, drawing a larger circle around it. Ariel watched carefully, then drew similar shapes. She made a circle and a small dot next to it, then another small dot farther away. Her fingers traced the lines gently as if drawing a story. Ethan leaned closer, fascinated. "Are these your planets?" he asked quietly. She nodded, then pointed to the dots and looked at him with intensity. He realized she was showing him where she came from. His heart raced. This was proof not only of life beyond Earth, but of someone alive and intelligent, reaching out to him in trust. When she spoke again, her voice was soft and melodic. He couldn't understand the words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. Ethan tried to stay calm. He noticed that Ariel's eyes scanned the lab, then she glanced at the door. He guessed that she was worried about leaving the room alone. It was then that he decided to make a choice. He spoke gently. "You don't have to be afraid. I will help you." Ariel's expression changed. Fear was still there, but now it was mixed with curiosity. She tilted her head and studied him as if weighing his words. Then she slowly moved closer. Ethan could see her small hands, delicate but steady, reaching out toward the notepad. She traced the drawings of her planets with her finger, then looked at him. Her eyes spoke more clearly than any words. She trusted him. Ethan realized that trust was a rare thing, even between humans. To gain it from someone so different, someone from another world, was extraordinary. He felt a responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had to protect her, not because of duty, but because he understood what it meant to be lost, far from home, with no one to rely on. He took a small notebook and drew a simple map of the facility, pointing to the doors, the hallways, and the storage areas. Ariel watched carefully, then nodded. She added small marks to his drawing, tiny symbols that he could not understand. He guessed they were her way of communicating directions or perhaps describing where she wanted to go. Later, Ethan brought her a blanket. She hesitated at first, then accepted it, wrapping it around her shoulders. He could see that she was still cold, both from the chill in the lab and from the fear inside her. Her small gestures were full of meaning. She was adapting, learning quickly, but everything she did carried an air of caution. By mid-afternoon, the other scientists returned, bringing more equipment and questions. They wanted to study her, to understand her biology, her technology, and her origins. But Ethan noticed that Ariel's calm demeanor began to falter whenever new people approached. Her silver eyes widened slightly and she stepped back, pressing herself against the wall. Ethan stood in front of her, shielding her from the others. "Please give her space," he said firmly. The scientists hesitated, then backed off. Ariel looked at him, her expression softening. There was gratitude there, unspoken but clear. For the next few hours, Ethan focused on understanding her needs. He brought water, small food packets, and tried to gauge what she could eat. Ariel watched him carefully, then imitated his actions. She accepted the water first, then cautiously nibbled at a small piece of bread. Each small step was a victory, a sign that she was beginning to trust him more with each moment. Then something unusual happened. Ariel stood and pointed toward the window. Outside, the sky was turning orange as the sun began to set. She whispered something, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan could not understand the words, but her eyes glistened with emotion. He realized she was telling him something important, something about leaving or finding a way back to her world. He knelt down beside her. "I understand," he said gently. "We will find a way. I promise." She looked at him intently, and for a moment it felt as if she could see into his very thoughts. Then she nodded, a tiny movement, but one filled with determination. Ethan felt a mixture of awe and fear. He knew that helping her would not be easy. There were rules, security, and questions from authorities that he could not ignore, but he also knew that leaving her alone in this place where she felt trapped and afraid was not an option. As evening fell, the lab quieted down. Ariel sat near the window, looking out at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Ethan sat beside her, sketching the shapes she had drawn earlier. Every so often, she would glance at him and make a small sound, almost like laughter, soft and musical. It was the first sign of relaxation he had seen in hours. For Ethan, that sound was a promise, a sign that she trusted him, that she believed he would not fail her. And for Ariel, the man beside her was no longer just another human. He was a protector, a friend, someone who had shown kindness when all else was uncertain. That night, Ethan realized something important. This encounter was more than just a scientific event. It was a connection between two worlds, two beings who could not speak the same language, yet could understand each other in ways words could never fully explain. And as Ariel looked up at the stars, her eyes reflecting hope and longing, Ethan knew that their story was only just beginning. The next morning, Ethan woke early, but Ariel was already awake. She stood near the large window of the lab, her silver eyes fixed on the sky, tracing invisible lines among the stars. Ethan watched her quietly. There was a quiet determination in her expression, a mix of hope and worry. He knew she was thinking about her home, her world far beyond Earth, and he wondered what it would take to help her get back. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Good morning," he said softly. She turned her head slightly and gave a faint nod, acknowledging him. Her gaze returned to the sky, But this time it seemed as if she was searching for something or someone specific. Ethan sensed that she might be remembering her crew, or perhaps the people she had left behind. Ethan brought a notebook and sat across from her. "We can try to understand each other," he said. He began drawing simple diagrams, stars, and planets, and then pointed to the dots in the night sky outside. Ariel leaned closer, tracing the lines with her finger, adding more shapes and symbols of her own. Each symbol seemed meaningful, telling a story he could not fully grasp. But he realized one thing clearly. She wanted him to understand her journey. Hours passed as they worked quietly together. Ethan noted the patterns she drew, realizing they were not just maps, they were instructions. Stories of travel, perhaps even warnings. Ariel's concentration was intense, her fingers moving gracefully, her face showing both pride and anxiety. Ethan felt a deep respect for her. She was far from home, yet she handled the situation with remarkable calm and intelligence. Then came the first sound of frustration. Ariel paused and tapped the notebook sharply, making a small exclamation that sounded musical but frustrated. She looked at Ethan, her silver eyes meeting his. He understood immediately. She wanted more help, more answers. But what she wanted he could not yet give. Ethan leaned closer. "I don't know all the answers, Ariel," he said softly. "But I will try. We will figure this out together." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded, accepting his words. Her expression was quiet, but for Ethan it was a victory. She trusted him enough to continue. By late afternoon, the lab had quieted down again. The other scientists had left for meetings, leaving Ethan and Ariel alone. He brought her a small plate with food. She hesitated at first, studying it carefully, then mimicked him and began eating slowly. He watched, noticing how each small action she took seemed deliberate, as if she were learning not only about the food but about human customs and trust. After she finished eating, Ariel sat quietly, staring out the window at the desert below. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. She was alone in a world she did not understand, yet she had shown courage beyond what most humans could imagine. He realized that helping her was not just about science or duty. It was about compassion, something deeper than any rule or protocol. Then, as if sensing his thoughts, Ariel turned toward him. She made a soft sound, almost a question. Ethan leaned in, listening carefully. He did not understand the words, but the tone was urgent. She pointed toward the storage area across the room, then traced a line with her finger toward the door. He understood immediately. She wanted to move, to go somewhere safer, somewhere private. Ethan hesitated for a moment, thinking about the rules, the cameras, and the security guards. But when he looked at her silver eyes filled with both hope and fear, he knew he had no choice. "Okay," he said quietly. "We can move. I will help you." Ariel's expression softened, a small smile appearing, fleeting but real. She took a careful step toward him, her movements graceful and precise. Ethan guided her gently, making sure she felt safe as they moved toward the storage area. Once inside, he closed the door behind them. The space was quiet, filled with supplies, tools, and boxes, but away from the bright lights and busy equipment of the main lab. For the first time, Ariel seemed completely at ease. She sat on the floor, her eyes scanning the room, then returned to him with a small gesture, pointing at a box of equipment. Ethan opened it slowly. Inside were wires, small devices, and tools that might help her communicate or repair her ship. Ariel's eyes lit up and she touched the objects gently, as if connecting with old friends. Ethan knelt beside her. "Do you want to try?" he asked softly. She nodded eagerly. He showed her how to handle the equipment carefully, and she followed his instructions perfectly. It was clear she was intelligent, quick to learn, and used to handling complex tools. Each small success built her confidence, and she looked at him with gratitude every time she completed a task. As the evening approached, Ethan realized he had learned something important about Ariel. She was not just a visitor or an object of study. She had feelings, hopes, and fears. She could trust, she could learn, and she could adapt. But most importantly, she had the courage to survive in a world that was completely alien to her. He also understood something about himself. Being with her had changed him. He felt a connection stronger than any he had known. She had shown him that life could extend beyond the limits of Earth, that courage and kindness could bridge worlds, and that trust was the most powerful force of all. As night fell, Ethan brought a blanket for Ariel. She wrapped it around her shoulders and gave him a small, soft smile. She pointed toward the sky again, then whispered something he could not understand. He nodded, understanding only through feeling. She wanted to return home, and he wanted to help her. That night, as the lab grew quiet, they sat together. Ethan sketched the symbols she had drawn earlier, while Ariel watched, occasionally correcting his lines. Neither spoke much, but there was a shared understanding between them. Words were not necessary. Their connection went deeper than language. For Ethan, the experience was unforgettable. He realized that this encounter was not only about discovering someone from another world. It was about friendship, trust, and the courage to face the unknown. Ariel, with her silver eyes and quiet determination, had shown him that even the smallest gestures of kindness could change everything. Before leaving for the night, Ethan looked at Ariel and whispered, "Tomorrow, we will try to find a way." She looked back at him, her eyes shining in the dim light, and nodded. It was a promise that no matter how impossible it seemed, they would face the challenges together. And in that quiet, unspoken agreement, Ethan felt a hope he had never known before. Ariel had entered his life like a star falling from the sky, unexpected, brilliant, and unforgettable, and now he knew that their journey had only just begun. The next morning, Ethan woke with a sense of determination. Last night had left him restless, thinking about Ariel and her strange, shimmering presence. She had become more than just a visitor from another world. She had become someone he felt responsible for, and now he knew that staying in the lab under constant supervision would never allow her to return home. He had to act. Ethan quietly made his way to the storage area. Ariel was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her silver eyes fixed on the small star charts he had drawn the night before. She looked up as he entered and gave a faint nod. No words were exchanged, but the understanding between them was clear. They both knew today would be different. He moved carefully, checking the door and the hallway for any signs of guards or cameras. "We need to be careful," he whispered. Ariel nodded, her fingers tracing one of the star patterns on the floor. She didn't need to speak. Her eyes conveyed that she understood the risk and was ready to follow his lead. Ethan led her to a corner of the storage area where old maintenance doors led to the outer hangar. It was a long walk, and he kept close, ready to react if anyone approached. Ariel moved silently beside him, her movements precise and graceful. Every step she took seemed to blend curiosity and caution. She paused occasionally to look around, her silver eyes alert, scanning for anything unusual. When they reached the hangar doors, Ethan hesitated. He knew this was the critical moment. Beyond these doors lay the place where the small craft, Ariel's ship, was kept. He had only seen it briefly, but he remembered its sleek design and faint glow. If they could reach it, they might have a chance to get her home. He slowly pushed the door open. The hangar was empty, quiet except for the hum of the cooling systems. And there it was, her craft, small and delicate, resting on the platform. Ariel stepped forward, her hand hovering above the surface as if reconnecting with an old friend. Ethan could see her lips move slightly, whispering sounds he could not understand. She glanced at him, eyes shining. He nodded, signaling that he understood. Ethan quickly checked the controls. Some of the panels were dark, others flickering weakly. The ship was damaged, but it was repairable. Ariel moved closer to the interface, her fingers touching the buttons and lights as if she remembered what each one did. Ethan stood behind her, watching, ready to assist. Every movement she made was careful, precise, and filled with purpose. The alarm suddenly sounded faintly in the distance. Ethan's heart raced. "We need to hurry," he whispered. Ariel didn't speak, but she nodded. Together they worked quickly. Ethan connected cables and checked power sources while Ariel guided him with subtle gestures, pointing to circuits and buttons he didn't fully understand. Minutes felt like hours. The lights on the ship slowly began to glow steadily, and a soft hum filled the hangar. Ariel's eyes lit up with relief. She glanced at Ethan and gave him a small, grateful smile. He felt a rush of warmth. It was a silent "thank you," a moment of trust that meant more than any words. Then came the critical step, the launch sequence. Ariel moved to the main controls, her hands flying over the panels. She whispered the musical words again, and Ethan felt the room vibrate with energy. The ship's engines began to hum louder, responding to her commands. The hangar lights reflected off her shimmering clothing, creating a glow that made her look almost otherworldly. Ethan stepped back, watching as the ship slowly lifted off the platform. He could see the determination in Ariel's eyes, the courage it must have taken to do this alone. Yet she had not done it alone. He had helped her, supported her, and now he felt the exhilaration of seeing her take the first step toward home. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hangar. Guards had discovered the open doors and were rushing toward them. Ethan's heart pounded. He looked at Ariel, who met his gaze with that same steady, silver-eyed determination. Without words, they both knew what to do next. Ariel pressed a sequence of buttons and the ship responded instantly. A bright beam of light filled the hangar, and with a soft roar, the craft lifted higher, hovering above the floor. Ethan held his breath as it slowly moved toward the exit, the open sky beyond the hangar waiting. The guard shouted, but it was too late. Ariel's ship shot upward, breaking through the hangar roof and disappearing into the morning sky. Ethan watched, his chest swelling with a mix of relief and awe. She had escaped. She was safe. She was going home. For a long moment, the hangar was silent again. Ethan leaned against the wall, exhausted but smiling. He thought about everything that had happened, the trust she had shown, the courage she had demonstrated, and the bond that had grown between them. He knew he would never forget this day, never forget her. Later, when the facility returned to normal, Ethan sat quietly at his desk. He could still see the faint glow of the ship in his memory, the way her eyes had shone with determination and gratitude. He realized something important. Ariel had changed him. She had shown him the power of trust, courage, and compassion. She had reminded him that even in the most impossible situations, hope could guide the way. That night, Ethan looked up at the stars, wondering where she was, hoping she had reached her home safely. He remembered the way she had traced the constellations, the soft musical sounds she had whispered, and the trust she had placed in him. For Ethan, it was a reminder that the universe was larger than he had ever imagined, and that connections could form across worlds, beyond language or distance. Even though Ariel was gone, Ethan felt her presence near him. Her courage, her hope, and her gratitude lingered in his heart. He knew that this encounter had not just been a moment in his life. It had been a journey, one that would stay with him forever. Ethan finally leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He could still hear the soft hum of her ship, still see the glow of her eyes. And deep down, he knew that someday, somehow, their paths would cross again. The thought filled him with a quiet sense of peace. For now, he had done everything he could, and that was enough. Days passed after Ariel's departure, but Ethan could not forget her. Every morning he walked past the hangar where her ship had lifted off, remembering the way her silver eyes had met his in trust and gratitude. The memory of her presence lingered like a soft light in his mind, a reminder of something extraordinary that had touched his life. Back at his lab, Ethan tried to focus on his work, but the hum of computers and the routine tasks felt empty without her. He found himself sketching her star patterns on notepads, tracing the symbols she had drawn during their long hours together. Each line was a memory, each dot a reminder of her courage. He realized that in helping her, he had discovered something about himself, the depth of compassion, the thrill of connection, and the courage to act even when the outcome was uncertain. Late one evening, as Ethan studied the charts, a quiet sound came from his computer. At first he thought it was a technical glitch, but then he noticed a small blinking light, a new message, encrypted and unusual. His heart raced. Could it be? He quickly opened the transmission, his hands trembling slightly. The screen displayed star coordinates that matched the symbols Ariel had drawn, along with a simple message: "Gratitude endures beyond the stars." Ethan stared at the words in disbelief. The message was brief, but it carried a depth of meaning that no ordinary words could capture. It was her way of reaching out, of letting him know that she had arrived safely and that she remembered him. For hours, Ethan sat quietly, thinking about her journey. She had returned home to a world far beyond Earth, and yet she had taken the time to reach back, to acknowledge the connection they had shared. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a mixture of relief, pride, and a lingering sense of wonder. Ariel was safe, and she had remembered him. In the following weeks, Ethan noticed subtle changes in himself. He paid more attention to the people around him, listened more carefully, and acted with greater thoughtfulness. He realized that the experience with Ariel had taught him the value of small acts of kindness and the power of trust. He felt connected not just to her, but to the possibilities that life offered when courage and compassion guided one's actions. One evening, Ethan returned to the hangar to inspect some equipment. The room was quiet, empty, and filled with the soft hum of machinery. He stood in the middle, looking up at the sky through the open roof. The stars sparkled like tiny jewels, and he imagined Ariel's silver eyes scanning the constellations, tracing paths back to her home. He smiled softly, knowing that she had found her way, and that their brief time together had made a lasting impact on both their lives. Ethan continued to document everything he had learned from her, the star patterns, her gestures, her expressions, and the musical sounds she had made. He compiled notes and sketches, not just for science, but as a personal record of someone extraordinary who had entered his life. He knew that the story of Ariel was bigger than him, bigger than the lab, and perhaps even bigger than Earth itself. It was a story of courage, trust, and the connections that could bridge worlds. Sometimes, when he felt alone, Ethan would sit quietly and imagine her voice, soft and musical, whispering words he could not understand but felt in his heart. He remembered the small moments, the way she smiled faintly when he offered water, the way she traced the constellations with her finger, the way she trusted him without hesitation. These memories became a source of comfort, reminding him that extraordinary things could happen even in ordinary lives. One afternoon, while reviewing the encrypted transmission from her, Ethan noticed something new, a faint signal that seemed to repeat the pattern she had drawn. He carefully decoded it and realized it was a simple map, perhaps a message meant only for him. It wasn't urgent, and it wasn't a request for help. It was more like a gentle reminder that she remembered him, and that the bond they had shared was real. Ethan felt a sense of closure, but also a quiet excitement. The universe was vast, full of unknown places and possibilities, and he had already glimpsed one of its wonders. He knew that somewhere out there, Ariel was safe, looking at her stars, and that their paths might cross again someday. The thought filled him with hope, a feeling that lingered long after the stars had faded in the morning light. Weeks turned into months. Life at the research base returned to routine, but Ethan carried a secret sense of wonder in his heart. He continued his work with renewed purpose, driven not just by curiosity but by the memory of someone who had trusted him completely. He shared the story with a few close colleagues, carefully leaving out details that might compromise her safety, but the essence remained: the extraordinary encounter, the courage, and the bond that transcended language and worlds. One night, while gazing at the sky, Ethan whispered her name softly, almost as a prayer, Ariel. He imagined her smiling, her silver eyes reflecting the light of distant stars. In that quiet moment, he understood the depth of what they had shared. Trust, kindness, and courage had brought them together, and even though their time was brief, it had left a lasting mark on both of their lives. Ethan knew that he would never forget her. Ariel had been more than a visitor from another world. She had been a teacher, a friend, and a reminder that life held wonders beyond imagination. Her courage had inspired him, and her trust had changed him. He felt grateful, knowing that even across the vast distances of space, their connection endured. And so, life continued. Ethan carried on with his work, but he never stopped looking at the stars with hope. He knew that somewhere out there, Ariel's journey continued, and that their shared moments had made both their worlds richer. He smiled quietly, imagining her safe and free, and whispered once more, "Thank you, Ariel. I will never forget you." The universe, vast and mysterious, had brought them together for a brief but unforgettable time. And even as they lived on different worlds, their bond remained, a silent connection that crossed space, time, and understanding. Ethan felt a quiet peace, knowing that extraordinary encounters could leave lasting impressions, and that hope and trust were powerful enough to endure beyond the stars. In that quiet reflection, Ethan realized that life was full of surprises. Some were small, some were vast and unimaginable, and some came from worlds far beyond his own. But the lessons remained clear. Courage, trust, and kindness could change lives, forge bonds, and create stories that would last forever. And somewhere, far across the universe, Ariel might be looking up at the same stars, remembering him just as vividly, feeling gratitude and hope that crossed the boundaries of worlds.